That seems more likely for my now. Ugh. More obsessed with knit that I was. It is the. I'm probably gonna, and I'm gonna be doing it. So I'm. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance. Big thank you hug to all you OGs who keep coming back. And if you're new to my channel, very warm welcome to you. I'm so happy that everybody is still here. If you're seeing me for the very first time, I like to talk about books mostly. Sometimes I ramble on about other stuff. Sometimes I talk about popular books. A lot of times I talk about books that nobody else really is talking about. I am mostly a mood reader. Sometimes I have a potty mouth and I'm not sorry about it. But if you like what you see, give me a little encouragement by hitting that subscribe button. I'm here to talk to you about a bunch of stuff. I haven't had my traditional wrap-up videos come out for a while. It's either been ranting about the Booktube prize books or ranting about the women's prize. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a life update, and I'm going to tell you about all the books that I've read since my last wrap up. I thought I was only going to do a March wrap up, but it turns out I've only read 4 books in March that weren't Booktube prize books or women's prize books. So I decided to just catch you all up on every book I've read up until the book that I finished just this morning. First and foremost, so I had a giveaway a couple of videos ago. I had received a brand new copy of Kristen Hanna's The Women. I announced that winner in my Booktube prize rant video, and I never heard from that person, so I was really bummed. Well, it's been 2 weeks since that video has been out, so I decided to draw another name to win this book, and it's going to be the same process that I did before. It's random. It's from the comments from that original video. The new winner of this book, Murphval 702. Of course, I'm going to put it up on the screen. Congratulations, you're the winner of this book, hopefully. My email should be down in the description box below. Please send me an email letting me know that you have watched this and know that you're the winner, and to give me your mailing address, and I will get this to you as soon as possible. Okay, a couple of personal updates. So one of the things that has been going on in the past couple of months that has affected my reading, it's really affected me mentally across the board. So I have 2 dogs. I have Jake and Zoe. They're both rescue dogs, and we got Zoe in 2015, in January 2015. We can only estimate her to be, 11 or 12. She's getting up in years, and in the past few months, she has shown signs of what I thought was just arthritis. Her back legs appear to be getting weaker, and her balance is a little off. And so I finally took her to the vet to maybe get some anti-inflammatories, or at least something to manage the pain, because I figured if it's arthritis, she's probably in pain, and I just don't want that. Instead of it being arthritis, Zoe was diagnosed with degenerative, and I can never say the second word. It's very common in German Shepherds. It does happen in boxers. The good news is she's not in any pain. It's really kind of the opposite of arthritis. She's progressively losing the feeling in her back legs. It starts in the toes, then it works its way up, and ultimately she won't have use of her back legs. I won't go too deeply into where it will progress. Ultimately, we're going to have to make a really, really hard decision as far as quality of life. When she was first diagnosed, I was intensely affected just having it in my mind that it was going to progress super, super fast. And after a couple of days of it kind of settling in and realizing this has come on relatively slowly, and I just realized that it's going to continue to progress relatively slowly. It makes me sad when I think about it, but I have come to the realization, more of an acceptance that she has had a really, really good life, and she's doing fine for now, and we will cross that bridge. There's no sense in being grief-stricken now. That'll come eventually, and we'll deal with that then. For now, she's going to continue to be as spoiled as possible, like she always has been. It's just really, really hard dealing with the golden years of our fur babies. I just wanted to bring it up with you because I couldn't bring myself to talk about it in the previous video where I talked to you about the reading slump that I was in and what might have contributed to that slump. But let's move on to other stuff. Another thing that has been taking up time more than books have in the past few months, if you've been watching me for a while, you know that I am a big knitter. There was a period of time over a number of years where I was more obsessed with knitting than I was with reading. And lately I learned how to crochet. Then a few months back, my husband and I were watching the latest season of Ink Master, and one of the contestants walked out in this sweater, and both my husband and I were like, oh my God, what is he wearing? My husband got stars in his eyes, and he's like, that is the most awesome sweater I've ever seen. And I made the harebrained decision to say, I can make that. I made the sweater, and it took me a while. It was a journey. And I finally finished it. He looks great in it. He loves it, thank God. It's ridiculous, but I think it's amazing. And it took a lot of time. Any other crafters out there? Any other knitters or crocheters? If there are, and you have like an Instagram account that showcases your work, I would love to see it. So please share with me your account. All right, let's get on to the bookish stuff. So I am recording this on Wednesday, the 24th, and the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist was announced. I decided I am not going to do a separate video because all it will be is a rant video. I'm sure you guys have already seen all the videos that are out right now of shortlist reactions. I did a reaction video for the long list, and I did a reading update for the long list as well. I'll link both those videos down below if you want to see details of what I thought. I attempted 9. I read 7 in their entirety. The 2 that I DNF'd are on the short list. Will I reattempt to read them? Absolutely not. And then my 2 favorites did not make the short list. I am completely gutted. I'm just so disappointed. The one positive thing that I can say about this short list, for me, there's only one book that I need to attempt in order to complete the short list. And that is The Wren by Anne Enright, which seems to be a lot of people's favorite to win this year. The synopsis doesn't sound super compelling to me, but I will try it. What a year! All I get from it is my 2 favorites didn't make it and my 2 DNFs did. What a bummer. Okay, let's talk about the books that I've read since my last wrap up. So to keep it simple, I'm going to talk to you about the books in the order in which I read them. So keep in mind that I was in a little bit of a slump during some of these books. So the first book I'm going to talk to you about is Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. This is contemporary literary fiction, and you're following Gifty, who is a young woman, the daughter of a Ghanaian immigrant. She is a medical PhD student at Stanford, and she is studying the brain, specifically reward-seeking behavior and how it relates to addiction. She's not studying this to help other people per se. She's more studying this because her brother, Nana, died of an overdose of heroin, and she just wants to understand it. Meanwhile, her mother, who is completely racked with grief, is suffering from depression. She's suicidal, and she is basically living in Gifty's house, never leaving her bed. So this follows Gifty as she is progressing in her research and as she's dealing with her own grief and guilt. She's also taking care of her mother and just dealing with her entire family just coming undone. You also follow Gifty's journey on a spiritual level. She is trying to reconnect with her faith, but she finds herself conflicted because she is a scientist. So the whole science versus evolution is explored. Addiction is explored here, grief, depression, mother-daughter dynamics, a whole family dynamic, as well as race. So there's a lot going on in this book. The book is beautifully written. There's no doubt about that. But I found the story rather slow. While I did recognize beautiful prose here and there, instead of it immersing me more in the story, it kind of pulled me out. Like I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, that was really beautiful how she put that, instead of experiencing the prose within the story. So I know this is a really well-loved book and I really wanted to love it more, but I found myself a little bored at times. The story objectively is a good one. I listened to this book and it was really well narrated, and one of the things that kind of distracted me, every time Gifty's brother's name was mentioned, his name was Nana, and every time Nana was said, all I could think of was a grandmother. I just thought that was a really weird name. And I know, I'm sure it's a cultural thing, but every time I heard it, all I could picture was a grandmother. That's a Nana to me. So that didn't help. Ultimately, I mean, I'm glad I read it. I will read Homegoing eventually, but I just didn't like it as much as I thought I would. Next, I read A Flicker in the Dark by Stacy Willingham. Another really popular book, and it was my first, was it my first Stacy Willingham? It was my first Stacy Willingham, and I have to say, I was a little underwhelmed. Keep in mind, I was in a slump. But I actually had to look this up and refresh my memory of what this one was even about. So this one follows Chloe, who is a psychologist, but when she was a child, a 12-year-old, a bunch of girls went missing in her town, and her father was arrested and convicted and has been in prison for the past 20 years, and she has not spoken to him in all that time. Now, as she is getting ready for her wedding, girls start to go missing again, and she starts to remember certain things differently, and she starts to kind of look into what happened. How could this be happening again when the so-called perpetrator is already in prison? And the story goes from there. I found it predictable, but mostly it was forgettable because I can't even remember who the bad guy ended up being. I think I do. I think I figured it out pretty early on, or at least guessed, and was right. I didn't think the writing was bad. Will I try her other books? Probably, eventually. Am I hot to get to it? Nope. There are so many books out there with this exact premise. Also, besides the fact that I was in a reading slump while I was reading this, I might be outgrowing my mystery thriller phase. I don't know. I don't know if I'm outgrowing the genre or if there's just not anything that's fresh enough to keep me compelled. Who knows? Who knows? I still have quite a few mystery thrillers in my physical library, so I'm not going to say that I'm not going to read it anymore, but I really hope there's still a mystery thriller out there that will mystify and thrill me. The next book I attempted was Villa E by Jane Allison. This one I just pulled off the ARC shelf at work because I needed something short to finish to do an ARC review, which is one of the requirements of my job. And it was only 160 pages, so I thought, why not? It was a mistake. I ultimately DNF'd it. I can't even remember what it was about, but it was just going to be kind of one of those rambling stories. I guess the story was inspired by the real-life collision of Irish designer Eileen Gray and famed Swiss architect Le Corbusier. Takes place in France. If that sounds at all appealing to you, by all means, check it out. But it wasn't for me. The next one came as a huge surprise. I can't remember if this was just the next one that I pulled off the shelf because I needed a short book to complete in a short period of time, because I shouldn't have liked this one, because if I had read the synopsis, I probably would have put it right back on the shelf. The book I'm talking about is Come to the Window by Howard Norman. I'd never heard of this author, and like I said, I should not have liked this book, but it was so charming and so engaging. This takes place during the end of World War I, and we're in Nova Scotia, and we're following Toby, who is a news reporter, and he is sent to this tiny little town to cover the trial of a woman who murdered her husband on the night of their honeymoon and then stuffs the gun that she used into the blowhole of a whale that was beached not far from their honeymoon suite. So kind of a quirky detail, but it doesn't matter because the story itself was just so compelling, and not a lot happens in this story, and that's very unusual for me. The way the story is written is Toby is keeping a journal because the town that he's covering the story for is quite a distance away from his home, who he shares with his beloved wife, who is a military doctor. Yeah, and she is freshly home from the front in France and Belgium. And there's a couple of scenes between Toby and his wife that are just adorable. It reminded me of old movies from the 40s and 50s, say Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, where they were just so witty with each other, but loving and affectionate, and just snappy dialogue that just oozed of humor and love. And it was just so fun to sit in on their conversations, regardless of what they were actually talking about. So you're reading this story that is taking place of one of the most horrific times in our history. We have war, then the Spanish flu, and then you have this murder. And through all of that, you have Toby and the wonderful relationship that he has with his wife. And it was just, I can't really put my finger on why I liked it so much, because it's just not something that would be typically in my wheelhouse. So I am happy to recommend this book. It's short. It's only a little over 200 pages, so it's a relatively quick read. You will have to wait for it though, because as I said, it's an arc and it comes out in July this year. So if you're interested, mark your calendar. So those are the books that I read in March, but I did manage to read quite a few books in April. The first of which is The Stone Home by Crystal Hannah Kim. I read the arc, but it has since been published, so it's out there and available. This is historical fiction that tells a story that I was completely oblivious to. Evidently, in the 80s, as South Korea was preparing to host the Summer Olympics, the government decided to clean up the streets by picking up anybody who was out past dark, picking up anybody who might have sullied the aesthetic of the country. They gathered up all these people and they stuck them in reformatories, and they were subjected to slave labor and minimal, if any, medical care, substandard education for the children. Yes, the captives did include children, and they were kept there against their will indefinitely. Stone Home follows a young girl who is homeless with her mother, living on the streets, and they're scooped up and sent to a reformatory. And it is about how they survive and form community with the other people who live in the reformatory. You're also following a pair of brothers who are teenagers, I believe, at the time. They are also sent to the same reformatory, and you follow their journey as they are forced to do terrible, terrible things just to survive, and it turns them into different people. This is a dual timeline story, but most of it is set back in the 80s during the time that the main character is spending in the reformatory. But you also get glimpses in present day of the main character as an adult and how her life was shaped by time spent in that reformatory and how she ultimately is connected to the two brothers. I, for the most part, enjoyed this story. I love learning about things in our history, in other cultures and other countries. This was during my lifetime, so it blows my mind. This is a big, big world, and so much goes on that it's so easy to be oblivious to. Books like these are treasures as far as educating the general public. As I was reading the story, however, I think it could have stood a little bit more editing. I'm not put off by reading about the terrible nature of humans, torture, violence, despair. I think if that's what's going on, absolutely put it in your story. But there comes a point where you get it, you know this is going on, move forward. And it took a while for it to move forward. So there were a couple of points in the story where I was like, Other than that, I enjoyed the story. I had feelings at the end. There was heartbreak, and it evoked emotions from me in a way that I like books to do. But I don't want you to be put off. I absolutely recommend this book. While I didn't specifically connect with the main character, because for most of the story, the main character was a very young girl, I appreciated her perspective of being in this situation. I also found myself engrossed in how a certain community can form under the worst circumstances, and at the same time following the two brothers who are subjected to terrible things, and how it can change you for the worst was also interesting to read about. So I definitely recommend this book. Just be patient with it. It is a good story. Next, I read Telephone of the Tree by Allison McGee. This one was another ARC that I pulled off the shelf. It's a middle grade, and it is due, I believe, to be published in May, if it isn't out already. This one follows a young girl who is dealing with grief. The young girl is Ayla. I believe she's 11 years old. She lives at home with her parents, and a few doors down on the same street is her best friend, Kiri, I think is her name. They do everything together, and they spend time climbing their favorite tree until one day something terrible happens and Kiri goes away and Ayla doesn't understand it. And then all of a sudden there is a phone, an old-fashioned phone for those of us who are of a certain age. A phone that I've had before is one that connects by a cord to a wall and has a dial on the front of it. And it is in her favorite tree. And somehow when people pick up the phone, they are able to talk to people who are no longer with us. There's a little bit of magical realism, but mostly this just deals with how Ayla's family and neighbors support her and help her through this terrible time of dealing with pain and loss and grief. And it is a beautiful story. I think it's great for middle grade, but as an adult, I certainly got enjoyment out of it. There are moments of light and hope, and I really liked how the author's ultimate message is, even when people are no longer with us physically, they are always with us in other ways. So I really enjoyed this one. I recommend it. I especially recommend it for kids who need a little bit of help understanding loss. I'm glad I read this one. I have some stuff to say about this next one. Next, I read The Exchange by John Grisham. This one was meant to be a sequel to the very popular The Firm from back in, what was it, the 80s? I had such high hopes for this book. Such high hopes. Where do I begin? Here's my experience with The Firm. This was the first John Grisham book I ever read, and it hooked me. I thought it was fantastic. It was probably my first legal thriller. I think John Grisham is a master of the legal thriller. I think they did a fantastic job with the movie. And when I heard that there was going to be a sequel to The Firm, I tried to think, well, how did it end? And then I thought, well, yeah, they did kind of leave it open. The ending of The Firm was kind of brilliant because it wasn't like a cliffhanger where you expected a sequel, but it ended in such a way that you could make a sequel that made sense. Because if memory serves, and if I'm confusing the movie and the book, forgive me, but I seem to remember that the movie followed the book quite closely, including the end. But from what I remember is Mitch McDeere, the main character in The Firm. And if you don't already know, The Firm is about a young lawyer who graduates from at the top of his class in Harvard, and he has his pick of any of the big law firms, and he ends up going with a relatively smaller law firm in Memphis, Tennessee, and the law firm ends up being owned by the mob, the Chicago Mafia, and he gets himself into trouble, and he realizes that nobody ever leaves the firm alive, and he has to figure out how to get out of this and still keep his life and the life of his family intact. And how it ends is Mitch was able to get a hold of super incriminating information about the mafia. He goes and he tells the head of the mafia, look, I have this information that can be very damaging to you, but it'll never see the light of day as long as me and my family are safe. And the mafia agrees to it. That's how it ended. And you could imagine that it would go one of two ways, that this agreement just goes on and on indefinitely. So there's no reason for a sequel, or something has happened where this incriminating information does see the light of day and Mitch finds himself in hot water with the mafia again and creating a story based on that. And so that's what I thought the exchange was going to be. Doesn't that make sense? But no, this story is completely different and separate, and in no way, with the exception of the main character and his wife, connected to the first book. And not only that, I was completely bored. I was so disappointed in this book. And I have to say, I'll even go so far as to say this was my absolute least favorite John Grisham book. And I've read many. This one follows Mitch as he is now an attorney for a pretty big firm. He and his wife are living in New York City. They have 2 kids now, and Mitch takes a case that has to deal with clients in somewhere in the Middle East, and it has to do with some contract with the government to build a bridge, and another partner in the firm is kidnapped, and it just so happens she's the daughter of one of the founders of the firm, I think. The whole rest of the story is trying to negotiate with the hostage takers to let her go. I'm bored even telling you about it. It has nothing to do with the original story, nothing. There were a couple of scenes where certain, I guess, loose ends were wrapped up that were not even nostalgic. This was a huge, huge disappointment. If you loved The Firm and you were excited about this book, please save yourself time and heartbreak because they have nothing to do with each other. And even this as a brand new story was underwhelming, to say the least. Wah, wah. Next book I read, a Booktube darling, I think, and that is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I was excited to read this one because the only other book that I have read by her was her latest, Midnight is the Darkest Hour, and I absolutely loved that book. So I was really excited to read her most popular. It just so happened to be the book club book for April for my work book club. So I know this book has been talked to death on Booktube, so I won't go too far into it. It's dark academia. This is a dual timeline and multi-perspective, but mostly you're following Jessica, and you're following her in the present day as she goes to a 10-year college reunion. 10 years ago, when she was in college, she was the part of a very elite clique of friends. And I believe it was her sophomore or junior year. He can't really remember. One of those friends in her group was murdered brutally. And another friend was accused, but there wasn't enough evidence. And this murder, of course, changed everybody's lives and the trajectory of their lives. And it changed their friendship with each other. Now, in the present day, as they go to their reunion, they are learning different things about what happened. And even though most of the friends still believe that one friend is guilty, they're all discovering new details that make it clear that he is innocent and it was one of the other friends who committed the murder. So the story goes from there. I thought it was pretty funny because as I started reading it, it read very much like Ruth Ware's The It Girl. In fact, when I finished this book, I went back and read some reviews like I do any book that I finish. And there were a lot of people who thought The It Girl was a cheap knockoff of In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. If you like dark academia and you like multi-perspective, dual timelines, twisty type stuff, you would enjoy this. I did enjoy this. I thought the characters were definitely more likable than the characters in The It Girl. So I definitely enjoyed this one more than The It Girl. But what I realized is that I wouldn't say dark academia isn't for me, but it doesn't excite me like it excites a lot of people, which makes me wonder if I should even bother with The Secret History. As a thriller, though, I thought this was pretty decent. The way the story unfolds and you're learning about different things that happened on the night of the murder from different people's perspective, you think, oh, it's this person who did it. Oh, it's this person. And I personally did not figure out who it was until the reveal. So I have to give it credit for that. And I thought that the way it played out made sense. There were a couple of plot holes that I wondered about. For instance, Jess, the main character, gets into some shenanigans the night of the murder and she ends up getting cuts all over her hands and her legs, but it was never explained in the story on how she explained those cuts away on the night that her best friend was murdered. She should have had to have told the police how she got those cuts when her best friend not only was murdered that night, but was stabbed to death. I like this one enough. And I would recommend it as a thriller, and if you like dark academia especially. But of the two books that I've read by Ashley Winstead, Midnight is the Darkest Hour is still my favorite. So I've saved the best for last. So not only are they the 3 most recent books that I have finished, they're the ones that I have enjoyed the most. Is it because I came out of my reading slump? It's likely, but who knows? I really enjoyed these final 3 books, and I'm super excited to talk to you about them. The first of which is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I listened to this, and it is narrated by, I believe her name is Julie or Julia Whalen, and I think she is one of, if not the best audiobook narrator there is. I have listened to multiple books by her and she does a phenomenal job, and this was no exception. And if you've been watching me for a while, you know that I do not gravitate towards romance, but I will also say I would not classify this as a romance. Does a romance happen? Yes, but that is not the core of the story. I would say this is women's literature. Romance is the first genre listed on Goodreads, but there is just so much more to this story. This one follows Nora. She is a literary agent. She lives in New York City. She lives the fast life, but mostly she's married to her job. She has a younger sister, Libby, who is married and has children. And Nora has always felt protective of Libby because their mother died when Nora was, I think, in her early 20s and Libby was still a teenager. And so Nora raised Libby. And so really that's Nora's whole life, is her job and her sister. And then one day Libby brings the idea to Nora, you know what, let's get together, let's go away on a vacation. So they decide to go and spend a month down in this tiny little town in South Carolina, I think, or North Carolina. And Libby ostensibly just wants Nora to step away from her job and just live a little. She creates this list of things that she wants Nora to do, like ride a horse or go skinny dipping, date a lumberjack or something like that. And Nora is at first appalled, but she decides to go with it because she adores her sister. While they're there, Nora discovers that Charlie, who is an editor, who she had had a rather nasty run-in with a few months back, he's also in town. The story kind of goes from there. You know what's going to happen. That's kind of the formula for romance. And really one of the main reasons I don't really care for romance, they're predictable. For many people, that's what makes romance great for them. But there's way, way, way more to this story. You are following Nora as she struggles against finding happiness in her life. She feels guilty about things that went on with her relationship with her mom. Nora's got just a lot of stuff to figure out, and you follow her as she figures these things out. And you're also following her relationship with her sister and how that has evolved over time. And it's just an engaging story. And I'll tell you something, Emily Henry knows how to write witty banter between two people who you know are ultimately going to fall in love. I laughed out loud a few times in this, even though I knew how it was going to end. To follow Charlie and Nora's story from being strangers to being work acquaintances to being enemies to being friends, it was relatable, it was realistic, and it was funny and charming and cute, and I absolutely enjoyed myself. If I were to say one thing that I don't like in general about a lot of romances, and this one also was no exception, is I don't really like sex scenes. especially when I'm listening to a book. I don't like hearing the word nipple. And it's not like I'm a prude or anything. I just feel like I'm invading someone's privacy when you are following a play-by-play sex scene. I don't care for it. And there are a couple in here. And by probably the third one, I was fast forwarding it, 15 seconds ahead, 15 seconds ahead. So whether you listen to it or you're reading the physical book, if you feel the same way I do about sex scenes, I mean, it's easy to skip through. This story is worth it to do that. I absolutely recommend this. I will continue to read Emily Henry's books. This is only the second one. The only other Emily Henry I've read is People We Meet on Vacation. This one particularly was fun. Lots of book references in this book. That's just super fun for all of us book nerds. Had a great time with this book. Definitely recommend it. Next up is a book that has been sitting on my shelf for almost a year, and I'm just so bummed I didn't read it sooner, but at the same time, it came at just the right time. I absolutely love this book. The List of Suspicious Things by Jenny Godfrey. This book came in my goodie bag when I went to the Women's Prize for Fiction live show last year. And I read it specifically because I believed it was going to help me out of my slump. And I was right. I loved this book. This is probably the first book that I'm 100% sure is going to end up on my best of the year. This book was 450 pages, and if you know me, you know that that's usually about 100 pages too long for me. I didn't feel it. This follows Miv, and she is an 11-year-old girl. Another story told from the point of view of an 11-year-old. Anyways, this takes place in the late 70s, and Miv is living at home in Yorkshire, England, with her dad, who is a blue-collar worker, and her mom, who she adores, but her mom is going through some type of mental illness where she is no longer speaking. When she's home, she's in her room sleeping, or she is in a hospital somewhere. And you don't know until the end of the book why that is. But Miv finds comfort in her friendship with Sharon, her best friend, who she absolutely adores. They adore each other. And Miv learns of what all the adults in town are completely engrossed in the news. There is a serial killer on the loose, and this is actually based on true events. There was the Ripper of Yorkshire in the late 70s, who ultimately murdered 13 women. When Miv finds out the police are having a hard time catching this guy, Miv decides to take it upon herself with Sharon to try to find out who the Ripper is. The way she's going to do it is she's going to be more observant of the people in her town and make a list of suspicious behavior. And in doing this, she gets to know the people in her town, and you follow as she gets to know Omar, who is the shopkeeper at the local convenience store, and he is a Pakistani man. He lives there with his young son, who is in Miv's class. And as she's investigating Omar, her and Sharon get to know Omar's son, and of course, it being the late 70s, people who are coming over from Pakistan were not very well received. So you follow Omar's struggle with that. Then you follow Miv as she discovers that the husband of her beloved librarian is abusing the librarian. So Miv adds him onto her list. And the story goes from there. This is a coming of age story more than it is a mystery or thriller. I love a good coming of age story, and this is an excellent one. You learn about the different people in Miv's town and her relationship with them. Miv learns to view people in a different way because of her relationship with Sharon. And you just meet all of these people in Miv's town and how they connect with each other and how they help to shape and form Miv. I absolutely loved this book. I highly recommend it. As I said, it's almost 500 pages long. I finished it in probably 4 days. I couldn't put it down. All I wanted to do was read this book. And that's really what makes a good book, right? If you like a good coming of age with a little bit of historical fiction and family drama. Please do yourself a favor and read this book. It was outstanding. And what a great delayed gift from last year's Women's Prize for Fiction. If they decide to put another book in the goodie bag this year, I will be reading it a lot sooner. And finally, the book that I just finished this morning was The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, of course, her memoir. I listened to this one. This was narrated by the actress Michelle Williams. She did a great job. I'm so grateful that Britney did not narrate this book because she actually narrates the introduction. Very short, but her voice, her speaking voice, I would not have enjoyed very much. But her story, incredibly compelling. I could not stop listening to this book. It's relatively short. It's only 6 hours, but I finished it in 3 days. I could not stop listening to her story. And when I wasn't listening to it, I was thinking about it. When Britney Spears came onto the scene, I was already late 20s, maybe early 30s. She was on my radar, but of course I wasn't a teenager being completely obsessed. She was completely compelling to watch when she would perform on awards shows, but she just wasn't someone that I followed. I didn't buy her music or anything like that. But I have been, of course, aware of all of the drama that has been her life over the past 20 years with her shaving her head, her impulsive marriages, and finally with the conservatorship. So when her memoir came out, I was intrigued. It's just being really, really well received. And so when it became available on Libby, I scooped it up, and man, it is good stuff. It is very well written. She comes across as an intelligent woman who understands herself. You know, memoirs are not something I feel comfortable reviewing as far as how it's written, the content, because it's somebody's personal story. So to say it's a true story, to say it's an accurate story, you really can't comment on that. It's her truth, though. Whether or not her truth is the truth, I think that's irrelevant as far as it being an interesting reading experience. But I will say she articulated what she went through and how it made her feel, how it shaped her, how it affected her decision making in her career and her personal life. I thought that was all very well done. I enjoyed hearing about her childhood and how she got started in show business. And if everything that she talks about as far as what her father and mother did to her, not only as a child, but in relation to the conservatorship, if that is all accurate, that is just insane. It's an incredible story. I can't believe that someone would do something like that to another human being, much less your daughter. I just really, really found her story super compelling and interesting and engaging and eye-opening. I really, really empathized with everything that she's gone through, and I am happy for her that she has made it to the other side. The only thing is, I would say, not that it really has anything to do with her memoir, but the way it made me feel as far as her as a person, it's kind of contradictory to the person she puts forward on Instagram. I don't follow her on Instagram. I have looked at her Instagram account out of curiosity, and she does some unusual things. And if you were to only know about Britney Spears, just what she puts out on Instagram, you would think she was crazy. You would think she doesn't have firm grip on reality. You would think that she doesn't value herself as a woman the way she says she does in her memoir. And just as an example of that, a lot of her posts on Instagram are her in skimpy clothing, dancing in very provocative ways, looking right into the camera, giving bedroom eyes and all that. And I don't have any problem with that. Express yourself how you want to express yourself. But she mentions in her memoir that it broke her spirit to be sexualized by so many people in the industry, in addition to her father and her mother. And she resented being sexualized and being made to wear certain things or do certain things. And so I just find those two things contradictory. But that notwithstanding, the memoir, for what it is, for whatever it is, it absolutely is worth the read. And I'll say one last thing. She does it respectfully, but she does spill the tea on Justin Timberlake and her sister, Jamie Lynn. Top-notch gossip. But yeah, if you want to tick a box on your nonfiction book list, this is a good one. So that's it. Those are the books that I've read since I last did a wrap-up. Also, let me know what you guys have been reading, since we really haven't talked about what we're reading now in a while. I would love to know if you have come across some new favorites. Please let me know what you guys have been reading. Or you could just say hi down in the doodly-doo. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.